Making every single variable public usually isn't the best thing you can do. It can lead to unexpected errors and messy code. That's the reason why in this video you will be learning the differences between public and serialized field in Unity. So firstly, let's quickly see some differences between serialized field and public. By using the attribute serialized field, we are going to make the variable visible on the inspector, and that variable isn't going to be accessed in other class or script. Then by making a variable public, it's going to be visible on the inspector and it will be accessed in other class or script. This second line here in both is the most important thing, because serialized field can't be accessed in other class or script, but in public they can be accessed. So to create a variable that can be modified in other scripts, you will use what are you going to use? Exactly, public. Then, if you want to create a variable that can't be modified in other scripts, you will use exactly serialized field. Why making every variable public is a bad idea? Because unwanted scripts will have access to variables they shouldn't, and you will be writing messier and not cleaner code. Once you know this very basic theory, let's go to Unity and actually see how this works. I have an empty Unity project and I'm going to set up some basic stuff. First, I'm going to create a new empty game object. I'm going to call it just player. And to this player, I'm going to add a new script. For example, I will call it player movement as a new script. So to make a player movement, you usually need a speed variable, okay? And also probably you have seen that in many tutorials, in order to create this speed variable, what they do is put public and for example float, and they give this variable name, for example speed. So then when you come back to Unity and wait until everything compiles and you go to the player game object, you can see that clearly you can change the speed from the Unity editor. And maybe you think, okay, everything is working fine, I can see and set this variable from the inspector. But let me quickly show you other thing. If you, for example, create another game object, as it is just an example, I'm going to create a game manager game object, and of course I'm going to create a new script with the same name. Here in the start function, private void start, okay, I could grab here the speed from this player movement script and modify it. Here I could write find object of type player movement in this case, because by doing this, what we are actually achieving is to access this player movement class we created, and then by doing this we will also be able to actually modify, as you can see, the speed variable. And as I can access this variable, I can also modify it to, for example, I don't know, 100. Why I can modify this variable? Because in the player movement class script, I have set my variable to public. So the best way to avoid this happening is to set this speed variable as a private variable. So now in this game manager, as you can see, I'm going to receive an error. Player movement.speed is inaccessible due to its protection level. So now I will just delete this line and I will come back to Unity, and as you can see in the player inspector window, I can't modify the speed from the inspector. In these types of situation is when the attribute serialized field is very helpful, because now in the player script I'm going to be able to modify the speed value in the inspector. But then, for example, if from another script I try to access this variable, I won't be able. Let me quickly show you. So I'm going to do find object of type player movement, and I'm going to try to access speed. As you can see, I can't. okay, and I'm going to receive the same error I showed you before. So here I made a small summary about what we have talked. So firstly, you should ask yourself, do I want to modify this variable in other script? If so, make it public, or if you don't want to modify it in other script, you can either serialize it to modify it in the inspector or just make it private. In the Unity documentation, you can find obviously more information about the serialize field. Something important here is Unity can serialize fields of the following types, and you have here all the types of data you can serialize. For example, you can't serialize dictionaries, but you can serialize arrays. The serialize field attribute can be either next to the private float variable statement, or also could be like this. As you can see, in both cases the speed is shown. Personally, I think that if you do this, it's a bit like you're wasting an entire line of code to just put serialize field, and then you may also have a lot of serialize field variables. So for example, let's say that I have here 3 serialize field variables. So as you can see, I don't really like how this looks, so that's why I personally prefer to put serialize field like this. To exercise this, I'm going to make something very simple. I'm going to add a cube, just a 2D cube, square actually, and as you can see, this has a sprite renderer with a square, so I can easily change the color. I'm also going to center this game object. I will create a new empty game object. I'm going to call it color changer manager, and I'm going to attach a new script to it with the same name. In this square game object, I am also going to attach a new script with this same name. Remember that what I'm going to do is to change the color of the square. This means that I must grab this sprite renderer component and change the color property. So I will have to create a variable which is going to store the square sprite renderer. There are 2 ways of doing this. The first one is to create a private, in this case sprite renderer variable, with which in the private void start function I'm going to assign to sprite renderer equals get component sprite renderer. Okay, sometimes when you have a lot of components you have to assign. Maybe this isn't the best method, because in the start function you're going to have a lot of lines just assigning components. So what I do, and some other people do, is to actually keep this private variable, but add the serialize field we learned in this video. So now I have this field in my script, and I can easily drag and drop my sprite renderer. Other scripts won't be able to modify my sprite renderer, as this is a private variable. Inside my start method, I'm going to change the sprite renderer color to red, for example. So it will be sprite renderer dot color, because this is the property I want to modify, will be equal to color dot red. So now when I play the game, now my square is red. You can see here the color property of the sprite renderer is red. Then how can we change the sprite renderer color from other script? To do this, let's firstly delete this start method on the square script, and here, as we want to modify this variable in other script, we must put this variable as public. Then in the color changer manager, before we write anything in the color changer manager, public variables are by default serialized. They can be seen in the inspector, so this serialized field here attribute isn't going to do anything, so we can just delete it. In this color changer manager, what we are going to need is a reference to this square script. Again, you can make a serialized field variable or a private variable and assign the value on the start method. I believe the easiest one is to just create a serialized field, private, square, and here call it with the same name but script. So then here in Unity, color changer manager, square script, and we can easily assign it. Once we have this reference inside our private void start method, we can call this square script, and as this sprite renderer is public, we can easily modify the sprite renderer of the square. So sprite renderer.color equals color dot, for example in this case, green. And now when we play, our square is green. Of course, this example is very silly, but I hope that with this explanation, with this very simple explanation, you now know the difference between serialized field and public. Also, as an extra, I would like to explain other thing. If, for example, in my square, I have this sprite renderer variable, and I told you that by default, these public variables are serialized, so that means they can be modified in the inspector. Well, there is another attribute that is called hide in inspector, which basically does what it says. It hides in inspector the variable. So, for example, if in my player movement I have my speed set to public because I want to modify it, for example, in the game manager, but I don't want the speed to be shown on inspector, what I can do is to just right here hide in inspector. So now, as you can see in my player game object, I have nothing here, but I can still in my game manager, I'm going to find object of type player movement, and here I'm going to be able to actually graph the speed of the player. For example, set it to, I don't know, 100, and then just to confirm that everything is working fine, I'm going to print this value out. Now let's try this out, and in the console we can see here the speed. In addition to that, we have our square in a green color. Well, I hope that with this tutorial you now have a better understanding about serialized field and public variables. I am always uploading new content about Unity tutorials, etc. So if you want to improve your Unity skills, I will definitely subscribe to the channel. As usual, every suggestion, anything you would like to tell me is appreciated in the comments. And remember that if you want, you can download my game from the description down below. Thank you very much and see you on the next one.